As Iran and Israel continue to trade strikes, the US president has hinted at regime change in Iran. This comes as Tehran's foreign minister meets Russian President Vladimir Putin for planned talks in Moscow. Well, let's get more analysis from Maben, a professor of international politics at the University of Lancaster. Professor, Donald Trump had promised to be a president of peace, but he's now brought the US into this war with Iran, not even taking 2 weeks to think about it. Were you surprised by this move?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Surprised, yes and no. I was surprised because it seemed like, given his campaign promises of keeping the US out of conflict, given that he was suggesting that there would be another chance for Iran to engage diplomatically, then there was perhaps a naive hope on my part and on the part of others that this might not happen, that the US strikes on Iran might not happen. And yet, if we look at what Mr. Trump has said, his rhetoric over the past few weeks and months towards Iran, he's rejected what his own security intelligence agencies have said with regard to Iran, namely that there was no evidence that Iran is currently pursuing a nuclear weapons program. He's then called for diplomatic initiatives with Iran only for Israel to bomb. He's then called for another round of diplomatic initiatives only for the US to bomb. So it's incredibly difficult to believe anything coming out of the White House at present. There's not any real trust from Donald Trump coming on the basis of his words and then his actions.
Has it been a popular decision back home in the US, both among politicians and also the public?
No, I don't think the American public particularly wants to be embroiled in yet another conflict. It's only recently extricated itself from wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The US public is not of the mindset to go into another war. I think that's one of the reasons why Mr. Trump's campaigning was so popular and so successful, that he was going to extricate the US from all of these global entanglements that his predecessors had been involved in. And we're seeing those types of divisions, those types of anger manifesting politically. Prominent senators and Congress people have been calling for impeachment, have been suggesting that this is in breach of constitutional norms. And so I don't think it's a popular move at all, but it's a move that is clearly ideological and deeply political.
And what about internationally? Does the US have global support for the strikes on Iran?
Well, it certainly seems that way, given the number of statements from Western states. You just mentioned Australia in your package earlier. The UK has been supportive. EU states have been supportive, and yet there seems to be no real consensus about the legality of this. The UK's Chancellor Rachel Reeves was asked if the UK believed the US strikes to be legal, and she's refused to comment, whilst also saying that Iran must not have a nuclear weapons program. Yet Iran was a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It still is. It was adhering to IAEA inspections. It was engaging diplomatically in the various processes that the international community and the US had endorsed. And then the US has decided to engage militarily, seemingly in a preemptive act of self-defense. But if you ask many international law experts, they will say that this does not fall within the purview of Article 51 of the UN Charter. So yes, there's a lot of support, but it's a lot of support that is political rather than based on solid legal ground.
And how do you think Benjamin Netanyahu got this US president to do what previous American leaders had held back on for years?
I honestly could not say. It is quite striking that it is under Donald Trump, a president who campaigned on becoming more isolationist and becoming a president for peace, that has taken these strikes against the Iranian nuclear program. It's deeply incongruent there. And yet we've seen Mr. Trump has got this incredibly close relationship with Israel. He's got a rather fraught relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, it seems. And yet, despite all of these things, the US has taken the decision, in spite of the US intelligence agencies deciding, or concluding, I should say, that the Iranian nuclear program was not for a weapons program. So it's really difficult to ascertain why Mr. Trump has decided that now is the time to strike, given the domestic appetite for war is incredibly low, given his own intelligence assessments. We just don't know. There's a lot that we don't know here.
Meanwhile, as Iran weighs its response, which allies will it be calling on? Its foreign minister has travelled to Russia for talks at the moment.
Yeah, I think Iran will be trying to secure diplomatic cover from Russia, probably from China as well, in the sense that they are the two major global powers who are perhaps best equipped to offer some ballast against the United States on the international stage. Now, I really doubt that either Moscow or Beijing will be getting involved in this conflict militarily. I don't think either one of them has the appetite for this, or indeed, in the case of Russia, at least the capacity to do this, given what the Kremlin is engaged in Ukraine. But the diplomatic cover, I think, is quite useful. So we have that on the formal side of things. I think what Iran will be trying to do is lean into its relationships with the likes of the Houthis, Hezbollah, who, of course, have been decimated over the past 18 months by Israel, Iraqi militias under the Hashd al-Shaabi. We could see the rise of so-called grey zone activities, deniable acts of subterfuge and sabotage designed to erode and weaken their opponents, their enemies. But again, we just don't know. We don't know which direction Tehran is going to go in, whether it wants to risk an all-out war, risk increasing hostilities, or whether it wants to try and take steps to de-escalate whilst also saving face.
How might countries in the Middle East be drawn into this conflict, do you think?
Well, it's tricky because the landscape across the Middle East was shifting dramatically prior to October 7, 2023. We'd got these longtime rivals, Saudi Arabia and Iran, who had put aside their differences and were beginning to work closely together on a shared vision of regional security. And this was driven by a sense of economic pragmatism. Both needed cash stimuli. They both needed foreign direct investment for dramatically different reasons, of course. Saudi wanted to enact its Vision 2030. Iran wanted to revive its oil and gas infrastructure. But with the events of October 7, the harrowing terrorist attacks, the landscape shifted. Now, whether it's shifted enough to really insert a wedge again between Saudi Arabia and other Arab Gulf states and Iran, I'm not sure. We've seen very clear expressions of solidarity from Riyadh, from prominent Saudi officials, condemning Israeli strikes on Iran, expressing concern about US strikes. But there are a number of US bases in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, and Qatar. And that's, I guess, where the worry starts to come. Or indeed, if Iran follows through on the suggestion that it might close the Strait of Hormuz. There's a lot of different moving parts here. And again, I'm sorry to keep repeating this. We just don't know exactly what the different strategies are in the short, medium, and long term. But there are different moving parts, and the stakes are getting higher and higher each day.
Professor Simon Maben, really good to get your thoughts. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.